You're gonna need a bigger boat. So simple. I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for May 13th, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us this week, everybody, as Brendan and I talk about different animals that we are becoming, that we are transforming into.
What is this? Poor things?
About.
Is this poor things all of a sudden that we're talking about?
Could be poor things, could be animorphs, maybe.
Oh my gosh, Animorphs. I forgot about that.
I know. I mean, you talk about going back. That's a reference.
Going back. I used to love those books and that show.
I know. Me too.
Yeah,
I loved that show. I'm sure it is really dated now, but when I was 6, when that came out, or whenever it was, or however old I was
I don't know about you, but when we saw the movie, I saw the TV glow, and it sparked our nostalgia for shows like that. Animorphs was one of the first ones that came to mind for me.
Yeah, that's a great comp, actually, because if you go back to watch Animorphs now, like we see at the end of that film, and it's like, okay, maybe it's not exactly what I remember it to be. But my 6-year-old self has fond memories. Yeah,
I have fond memories. Yeah, I really do. That and Power Rangers were two of my favorites at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we're having a little fun as we open this discussion, but we are actually talking about a film that is really quite poignant and rich in how it references a certain animal, we shall say.
There are no animal transformations in this movie.
No,
kind of.
No literal transformations, but also sort of.
I had to play the Thunderbolts game by putting a bit of an asterisk at the end of that.
There is a little bit of an asterisk. Yeah.
Yeah.
We are talking about the new film on becoming a guinea fowl. This was released by A24 actually a few months ago. It got a really small limited release. I honestly don't even know if I got it here in South Florida. If we did, it was very brief. I did not get a chance to see it in theaters. However, it has now become available digitally. Mm-hmm. And that's how we got access to this film. This film did compete at Cannes last year.
Perfect timing.
Some fantastic reviews, and the buzz was really high for this one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great timing for sure, as this year's Cannes Film Festival is about to begin. I think the opening ceremony and festivities were actually today as we are recording this.
Yeah. Like we said on the main show, we already have a lot of friends who are in attendance at Cannes this year, and then so many of them are already posting their photos, their proof that they're actually there, and it's honestly really exciting to see. Hopefully we get the chance to go sometime.
I would love to go one day for sure.
We'll coordinate that.
Yes. So this film got its premiere last year. I think it also screened at the Toronto International Film Festival back in the fall, as well as New York. It made the rounds throughout the fall festival circuit and getting release early this year, at least here in the United States. So it is a 2025 film by our standards, our criteria.
Cool.
And I am deeply excited to get into this one. Are we ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. On Becoming a Guinea Fowl, it is written and directed by Rungano Nyoni. It stars Susan Shardy, Elizabeth Chisella, Doris Nalapawa, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film, but those are certainly the major players we were focused on for this conversation. I guess we could also shout out Henry B.J. Fury, who is the father character to Shardy's Shula character, which we may bring up in this film. He has a small role here, but a pivotal one that we will certainly talk about. If you're not familiar with this film, on an empty road in the middle of the night, Shula stumbles across the body of her uncle. As funeral proceedings begin around them, she and her cousins bring to light the buried secrets of their middle class Zimbabwean family. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this. Brennan, what did you think about On Becoming a Guinea Fowl?
Yeah, I quite like this one. And for quite a few reasons. I think one of the big things, and you know me, JD, you know I'm kind of a sucker for movies that look at certain attributes of domesticity, but through a lens of something that's very culturally specific, and yet the execution doesn't feel very culturally specific. There is a lot of universality in what is playing out here that I think anyone can really relate to, even despite the fact that this is strictly from the perspective of those in Zambia. And I think what's interesting about this movie, for one thing, is its sense of place, the country of Zambia in particular. I can't recall us really seeing many movies from that perspective specifically. So that made it kind of eye-opening for someone like myself who doesn't really have a lot of insight or knowledge into their customs and their way of life. So I found that really refreshing. And yet the film is still able to find that relatability that I like when you're looking at movies that may have a very specific foundation, even if it is going beyond that, which I really like too. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And I don't know if this is my favorite movie of the year or anything like that so far, but it might have my favorite performance of the year so far. That being Susan Shardy, who plays our lead Shula. I think she's magnificent in this movie. And I think really carries this thing from beginning to end for reasons I'm sure we'll talk about. It's a very quiet and meditative performance, at times almost emotionless, but there's certainly a reason for that. And it becomes more emotionally revealing as we get literally more reveals about this family and how they come together. There's clearly a reason for this kind of rift between family members. And even in some cases, Shula is being introduced to some of her family members for the first time through this process, whether it be through in-laws or even her own family. It just goes to show how big this family is, how broken that they've ultimately come over the process. And these reveals that come to light are devastating. I'm sure we'll get into some specifics. I don't really want to call it spoiler territory, but I think we may need to get into some of those specifics as it affects these characters going forward. But I really did like this one. It really does tap into something I like when movies are depicting something culturally specific and yet still makes it about all of us. And I think the movie finds that line and straddles it very well.
Yep, I agree. I think this is one of the best films of the year. I haven't done a top 5 or a top 10. We'll certainly get to that soon enough, as we are nearing the halfway point of the year, as crazy as that sounds. But I can confidently say this is in my top 5, without a doubt. It is deeply poignant. It is thematically rich. However, there is an undercurrent of black comedy here as well that I do think is effective, primarily because of how the film uses irony to emphasize its themes on generational trauma, the patriarchy, and suppressing the truth. Getting that balance right, especially when the material is heavy like it is here, is not easy. But that's the magic trick that Nyoni pulls off with her direction and tone management, which I think is impeccable. There are a lot of scenes here that are uncomfortable and have this satirical backbone, but they're equally on the knife's edge dramatically and emotionally. It's a tightrope that most films are not able to weave together. The tonal precision of this film cannot be overstated. It really is great. The cinematography is also really sharp. Nyoni uses these long, quiet takes that are often framed in close-up to emphasize the emotional volatility of these characters. And with Shula, there comes some clever editing as well to echo her repressed emotional state and disorientation. There are moments here where the film is purposefully blending reality with her fragility, something that I find really insightful given Shula's reaction to it all. There is certainly much to discuss with that and the film's themes as we go, but Nyoni's direction is noteworthy. I don't think it's just about its symbolism and how powerful that is here. The filmmaking and craft that helps elevate all of that stuff here is really quite great, including, to your point, the performances. Susan Shardy is really incredible in this film. I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Amazing in this.
Love how she's able to convey emotion and pathos with a subtle but blistering touch of humor throughout. Again, going back to how the film is able to utilize irony in this film. It is incredible. It is really, really great. And I think you nailed it when you said that this is a film that is culturally specific, yet emotionally universal.
Yeah.
That is wholeheartedly why this film is as powerful as it is.
Yeah, I love movies that do that, especially given the fact that, as I mentioned in my opening thoughts, I can't recall us really talking about Zambian culture in cinema as of late, or even if ever. I don't know if we've ever talked about a movie from Zambia on the podcast before. I know the film's filmmaker, Rungano Nyoni, has another film that she made before this. I Am Becoming a Witch, I think it's
I
called.
Am Not a Witch.
I Am
Yeah.
Not a Witch. That's it. Thanks for correcting me on that one. I have not seen that. But this is, it's a very enlightening experience seeing something like this. And the sense of place is very important. It really does a great job. The film does a great job depicting Zambia as kind of this like landlocked country, which it actually is. It's very much dead center of the continent of Africa in many ways. And there's a lot of wildlife. It feels very claustrophobic, and the film does a great job emulating that, which I think is very complementary to the emotional turmoil that's going on here too, as I'm sure we'll discuss. So I really like how all of those things are coming together in that regard. And I'm glad you called out some of the filmmaking here, because this is one of those films that may unfortunately get forgotten when we start talking about some of the best, not even just the best films of the year, but some of the best attributes of crafting a film when we get to the end of the year. There's a good chance a movie like this is not going to be on many people's short list for, let's say, best cinematography, for instance. And I'm not here to say that I think it's going to be one of the 5 best shot films of 2025, but I don't want it to be outside the conversation. I want people to at least remember it because of that simplicity, that subtlety that you're talking about. There are shots here from cinematographer David Gallego that are quite stunning. There's a particular scene that I want to highlight. I'm sure we're going to talk about it further, so maybe this is a nice prelude to get to that. It's a moment between Shula and her father, which takes place at this library. It involves sort of this weird party at a library of sorts. It's really hard to explain what's actually happening, even if it's clear to understand that there is a bit of a distance between Shula and her father. You know, there is some of that rift there. And the movie does a pretty good job getting into the reasons why without telling you the reasons why. But it ends with a phone call between the two of them as Shula is leaving. And the shot of her just slightly covered halfway, where you only see her legs, but it's covering the rest of her body upward, is one of the best shots I've seen so far this year.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great symbolism as far as what is being masked. The fact that there's a slight lifting of the curtain given her own backstory that is not being fully revealed to us yet, but is gradually being revealed. So that shot clearly indicates that something is coming to light, but it's not fully there yet. Little things like that throughout the entire film, I think, are very poetic. And I think we can't forget those things. I think it's really quite great.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. I do want to talk about that scene because I do think it is one of the most striking that we've seen this year. And to bring further context to what Brennan is talking about, at the core of this film, it is about the moral and emotional cost of being vocal in a culture that rewards silence, very literally, as we see at the end of the film.
Yeah.
That's why the title here is so powerful. The symbolism behind it is immensely poignant. For additional context, guinea fowls are social birds. They are known for their loud screams when they sense predators nearby. Yeah. So the metaphor here is not subtle, but it doesn't need to be.
Not at all.
Doesn't need to be.
I love that it's not.
I think it's a feature, not a bug. To become a guinea fowl, it isn't just about becoming vocal and negating the silence. It's equally vital in calling out the predator and pointing the finger where the danger is. There is nothing understated about that, especially when cultural norms are to conceal the truth and suppress trauma, something that defines the family is depicted here. That is the basis of a lot that unfolds here. In particular, the most powerful scene of the film, for my money, is exactly what Brennan is talking about. That moment between Shula and her father. She is pleading to him that her Uncle Fred was abusive and that he committed all of these horrible acts to her cousins. And he is completely dismissive of her, essentially tells her to move on. It's not a big deal. He's dead anyway, so why does it matter? So she simply walks away frustrated. However, before she gets too far, as Brennan noted, she gets this phone call from her father where he asked her if Fred did anything to her. And she's so stunned by the gesture that it takes her a moment before she reluctantly answers her father. And I do want to talk about the framing of the shot as you were talking about here in a moment.
Yeah, it's so
However,
good.
I do want to note, I think it is incredibly insightful that when she finally does answer her father, she lies to him.
Yeah.
As if she doesn't trust her father or trust how he would react. It's an incredible exchange that impeccably demonstrates the cultural and metaphorical divide between Shula, who is on her way to becoming a guinea fowl, and the rest of her family, who's stuck in patriarchal abuse and manipulation. And to complement or simply echo what Brendan was saying, I think that shot is incredible in complementing that exchange, because it is this high angle shot, wide shot, where her father is in full frame on the right hand side of the frame. You see him standing there next to this table, and Shula is 1 floor or 2 floors below him. But because it's this high angle shot, her face is covered by the wall. And so you don't really fully see her expression, but we do see her pause. As I noted, you do see her stunned that he would ask that question after simply refusing to engage in her concerns at all. It is stunning. The metaphorical maneuverings of this film is fantastic, but how it is complemented by that filmmaking, it is sensational stuff.
I don't think I've ever seen human legs give such an emotional performance before. I'll simply say that, because they do all of the, I was about to say they do all the talking, but they actually do all the walking is what I really mean to say there.
Yeah.
But it does express everything that you're talking about there. I absolutely agree. And even though the symbolism and how it correlates to the title of what it means to be a quote unquote guinea fowl, it's not subtle at all. I don't mind that it's not subtle. In fact, I like that it's not subtle, because in a way, the lack of subtlety in that particular metaphor adds further nuance in how we actually want to participate in this conversation. There is a lot to relate to with regard to Shula's Uncle Fred, who is the one that passed away, and the revelations that he was perhaps abusive to not just her, but also her cousins. It opens the door for a lot of questions as to how you would react in this situation if it were your family, given that, does everyone in your family even know about his history? And now that he has passed away, is it better to reveal that knowledge to everyone, or is it better to preserve the legacy of the man that they think they already know? And I think the film is actually asking us to partake in that question, that conversation, because there is a bit of a gray area there. And even though the movie is perhaps siding a little bit more with being truthful and honest as to who this man was, that doesn't mean everyone is ready to hear it just yet. And that does add some complications to this whole movie that make it even more universal. And I think those conversations come about because of the obviousness of its metaphor. It's more inviting into that debate, if you will. And I like that the movie's willing to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what's so really haunting about this film, despite its clever framing and satirical bite, as we noted. There is something really haunting about its depiction of patriarchal protection. The abuse by Uncle Fred and other powerful male figures is shielded by not just other men, but even some of the women in these families.
Yeah.
There's collusion to preserve the status quo, and even people weaponizing memory to protect these abusers, or just flat out manipulation and purposefully misinterpreting the facts. And it leaves Shula completely disassociated from the rest of her family throughout a lot of this film. And the way it all crystallizes here, holding up a mirror to cultural complicity, is utterly breathtaking, with how Nyoni lingers in the deep discomfort that we see in terms of the conflict to denote how trauma lives on in the silence. There are two scenes that really come to mind for me as this film crystallizes and
Okay.
really taps into these ideas. The first one is this remarkable moment where Shula and her cousin Nanza are confronted, almost ambushed by their mothers and aunts, where they, for the first time, seemingly confront the abuse and apologize for not being able to protect them. It's actually this really endearing moment of family togetherness. It's really powerful because oftentimes the scariest part is what's not said. It's what everyone already knows and still refuses to name. That's what has disassociated Shula more than anything else. So the fact that these women came forward and more or less put a name to it, it clearly affected her deeply, as well as Nanza. And to see them react in this deeply human way, I think is really captivating. And then the second scene is that final confrontation we see at the very end between the two families, Uncle Fred's.
Oh yeah, I want to talk about that.
Shula and the family of Uncle Fred's wife, who is being blamed for his death. It's an astounding scene where Shula's family lashes out at this widow, relentlessly attacking her and doing everything they can to protect the abuser. What plays out is maddening. The indignancy you feel is visceral, but of course that is the point that the film is trying to make. Again, it isn't subtle regarding its ideas on silence and repression of survivors, which is why the final moment of this film is so jaw-dropping as we see Shula enter the frame and the camera slowly zooms in on her, and she, for all intents and purposes, transforms into her final form as a guinea fowl.
Animorphs.
It is
Animorphs.
almost Animorphs. And it is so moving because it's not just about being vocal, although the courage to do so is very noteworthy, but it's also about calling out the predator. Shula making that final gesture vocally in that context is stunning. That's how trauma can become a beacon of hope, and the visual of Shula holding a child as she does it, I think adds further poignancy to that moment, and how all of that escalates, how it all crystallizes to address quite daringly, I would say, that polarity that you were just talking about. Spellbinding, incredible filmmaking.
And it's not even just about calling out the predator, as you're saying, but guinea fowls are also notorious for not just being talkers, as you said, but that vocabulary, if you will, is designed to also serve as protection from predators. So the fact that she, in that final moment, is holding a child and has a family of children with her, as not just a communicator, but a protector as well. I think all of that coming together, I think, is quite poignant. That final scene, which lasts for about probably 15 minutes, where it almost becomes kind of a weird, like, Zambian courtroom drama in a way. It's very jarring, and I don't mean this as a criticism, but there was a moment where I was wondering, where are we going with this? Because we were constantly viewing this from Shula's point of view, and all of a sudden she's just gone.
It shifts. Yeah,
it shifts. And at first I was a little unsure about that, but then when she reappears, I realized just how necessary that was, because she is now needed for this family, and her absence for that window of time is meant to be felt. In a weird way, it kind of reminded me of really the final half of Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru, where our main character is finally sadly passed away and is no longer in the movie. And you have these other people within his life coming together and having a conversation, a eulogy, and even disagreements about the man. And in a way, it's kind of structurally similar to that, just a bit more chaotic in this case. But I weirdly liked that by the end of it, even though in the moment I was sort of confounded by the choice. But I think it is the right one, given the final shot of the film, as you say.
Yeah, I completely agree. It is a bit jarring because we do leave Shula for a moment. However, I do think it works on two levels. The first, and perhaps most potently, is how it ends, as we just noted. And again, I have to call out the filmmaking because the camera is often going back and forth as we see the verbal sparring between the two families. And that sparring continues as the conflict begins to escalate. And the camera just slowly zooms in as Shula enters the frame with the child and walks closer to where the conflict is taking place. And then she just stops. Excuse me. We get the vocal gesture, which I'll say vaguely, that's what we hear. We hear something. And again, you think about her holding the child, what it all means symbolically. It is quite extraordinary to watch. It is really, really incredible. But I think it also works because so much of the conflict is Uncle Fred's family, Shula's family, protecting him. Even though we know, especially by this point, and this is honestly not that far, we're not that far removed from the scene I mentioned earlier with Shula and her cousin Nanza, where they're ambushed by their moms and aunts, who, for the first time, seemingly, they collectively as a family address that the patriarch has let them down in a lot of ways, and they've never really addressed it generationally. This is seemingly the first time they've done that collectively as a group. It's a powerful moment, and then it leads to this. So the fact that they're still defending him despite what we learn about him, I do think it says something about generational trauma, cultural norms, and suppressing the truth at all costs. And how that points back to the duality you mentioned earlier. So like, even though it's not from Shula's perspective, the conflict in how we see Shula's family protect Fred, despite what we know, to the point where, and again, this is where the cultural specificity of the film, I think, is quite extraordinary as well, where the widow's uncle or brother is paying them money. The widow's mother
damages.
is literally begging the family to forgive her. And like, it is extraordinary the lengths they go to seek forgiveness for something that really wasn't her fault. Like, she's an innocent victim.
There's a bit of gaslighting happening there. I think
a lot of gaslighting,
and the lack of Shula in that sequence, as we talked about, it just goes to show that without her in this moment, and without the growth that she has now, become as a new Guinea Fowl for this family, this is the chaos that will ensue without her. If anything, it's showcasing the worst side of this family that is about to come if she weren't to show up at the end.
Yeah, and that's what's so incredible about the gesture, because you do get the protective aspect as you were talking about, but to call out the predator in that moment, especially given how much of how bipolar it is, right? You're either on this side or you're on that side. Shula is supposed to be on this side of the conflict, but as we see, her family is doing nothing but protecting the abuser. So the fact that she comes out and makes that gesture to point out who the predator is, I do think that is, again, symbolically really, really potent.
I love that we never see him, Uncle Fred, either. Clearly
other
an
than-
actor is playing him, but every
Yeah.
time we have a chance to get a clear view of him and his face, there's something blurring it out. It's either out of frame, just in the distance, the
Yeah,
depth of field is not
exactly.
allowing to focus on it.
Yeah.
And I love that, especially given Shula's revelation that she may have been one of the ones
Yeah.
abused by
exactly.
him, and she chose to repress that memory. So
Very
the
much so.
the blurriness of Uncle Fred himself, I think, is very symbolic as well. So I
Yes.
love that choice.
Yeah, the film heavily infers that she is also one of the victims, which again is why I think it's incredible that she lies to her father when he asks if Fred abused her as well. She does not tell him the truth there. And it is indicative of how wide of a chasm that is, that relationship. She doesn't trust her father really at all. It's certainly foreshadowed in that opening sequence when she sees him there on the road. As I noted in the synopsis, Shula is the one that finds him dead on the side of the road. And
Yeah.
her first phone call is to her father,
Yeah.
who is at some sort of party. He doesn't really understand or care
Yeah.
that
And
she's in some sort of trouble.
It's not even his brother. As we find out, it's actually her mom's brother, if I'm not mistaken. So like she chooses to call her father in that moment. And even so, like when she first sees him and gets back into her car before even making that call to her father, and this is what I love about Susan Chardy's performance, you could sense some
Oh
form
my
of
gosh.
relief in her.
Yeah. Because I agree with you. I believe you noted this in your opening thoughts on the film. Chardy's performance here is really fantastic because a lot of it is quite internalized, and she's able to convey emotion subtly in this really stoic way. And while the rest of her family is grieving in some sort of way, she is wholly detached from all of this. You called it emotionless. It is quite an emotionless performance, which is in
What
context
makes it anything
really
but
appropriate.
emotionless.
That's what makes it great. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It-
it's
but-
phenomenal.
You're right that it is also a pretty funny movie, and I haven't really mentioned that yet. I think the dynamic between Shula and her one cousin, especially Nansa, her name is, played by Elizabeth Chisella. I love their dynamic. I would love to see a sequel, maybe call it The Adventures of a Guinea Fowl, just the two of them going on some Zambian adventure together. I would be all for that. I think their dynamic is quite playful, quite funny, and it definitely helps add a sense of levity to a movie like this that is very heavy in its situation. But I think the balance is very good. As you said, this is a very good example of how you do tonal balancing without it being too jarring or too noticeable.
Oh, I agree. I agree. I mean, the levity, the humor of the film is certainly not overt, but again, I love how it comes through in these quiet but blistering ways. One moment I think about is right after they pick up the body from the street, we cut to, I want to say, Shula's mother's house, or it could be one of her aunts, but they're at one of the houses of her family, and everyone is there. And there's this moment that seemingly I interpreted it as this cultural ritual where the women of the family are doing some sort of grieving exercise. It's a little reminiscent of the ending of the Ari Aster film.
Oh, Midsommar, is that what
Midsommar?
you're thinking?
Yeah,
Yeah, it is. But it is. Yeah, you're right. It is kind of prayer-like in a way.
Yes, it is kind of prayer-like. It's not as over the top as what we see in Midsommar, but
Yeah,
there
no one's
is
jumping
this-
off cliffs in this case.
No, no, absolutely not. But they're in this room, and all of the women are grieving in this almost ritualistic way, and Shula is completely disassociated to the point where her aunts even call her out at one moment, like, "Aren't you crying? Like, where are your tears?" Like, they see her emotionless and even call her out on it, which is subtly quite funny. Or there's a moment where she makes food for the widow, and one of her aunts is like, "What are you doing? You can't be making food for her." Like, just rips the food out of her hands. So like the
But that's something a
irony
family
of,
member would do in any culture, in
of
any
course,
custom. It's
yeah,
like I found that funny because I'm not going to name names, but I wouldn't be surprised if I were in a situation like this with my own family and someone passed away and there was like a widow involved that no one liked. One of my family members might do something like that too, because it's like
yeah,
it's really funny because it is relatable.
yeah. Brendan over here calling out his family. It's
I,
rude.
I love my family. I didn't say
Can't
who.
believe you do that. No, I'm just kidding. No,
For all you know, it could be like a distant cousin or something like that.
yeah, I mean, to your point though, there are a lot of families that have people like that.
Yeah.
And again, it speaks to that past trauma, the suppression of truth, because no one in that moment wanted to wrestle with the reality around Uncle Fred.
Right.
It was all about grieving the loss, which is understandable. Perhaps some people aren't aware of his abuses, or
Right.
even worse, they're simply tolerating the abuse and maintaining silence as a means of survival.
Yeah.
And again, I think there's an understanding to that, because when you're powerless, there's very little that you can do. But that's what gives weight to the transformation of Shula here and
Yeah.
becoming a guinea fowl. Is the film wants to highlight that the powerless is either for survival means or ignorance. They're just not calling out the predator until Shula decides to, to become the guinea fowl.
Yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible storytelling. It's incredible craftsmanship and, metaphorical.
Yeah.
Like the storytelling around that, I think is really, really great here.
And as I think about it, I'm looking at all the films I've logged from 2025 so far. I do stand by saying that I think Susan Shardy gives my favorite performance of the year so far. Still a lot to see, still a lot to contend
Yeah.
with. But I think she is at least up there for me in the conversation.
Yeah, it's really great. I have not done that exercise at all, but she certainly does give one of the best performances of the year so far. There's no doubt about it. And the film
Yeah.
itself is quite incredible. I also have not seen I Am Not a Witch. I heard great
Yeah.
things about it.
Me too.
So, while this is technically a sophomore effort, for me, it's my introduction to Nyoni, and my God, it's
a good one.
It's
a good one.
really, really fantastic work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good one.
Absolutely. Do you have any other thoughts on the film? Any final thoughts?
I know we already called out some of the people behind the camera, such as David Gallego, the cinematographer here, but because there are a lot of still shots here, and just the smoothness of it all, let's also give attention to Nathan Nugent, the editor here. I think this is a very well edited film, and in order to maintain some type of some type of pace like that without it feeling too languid, I think there's a lot of great work going on behind the scenes here that we really shouldn't forget about. It's a very well made film, but it's just not.
Yeah.
It's not noticeably well made, which is actually what makes it better. I feel like it's like sometimes the best made films, at least for me, are the ones that don't call attention to how well made that they are. Sometimes a movie is meant to do that. As I'm sure we'll talk about in just a few weeks, a movie like, let's say, Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is absolutely going to call attention to how well made it is. And it's supposed to, right? But sometimes the best movies of their kind make you think about how well made that they are. And I think this is a great example of that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this isn't a flashy film, but there is some sophistication to the craft. The only moments where I feel like the filmmaking is overt, but again, I think this is really great. I called this out in my opening thoughts, is how clever some of the editing is around Shula, because the film does blur reality and, I don't want to say fantasy, but
No, yeah, it's not quite magical realism, but it's dreamlike in a way.
yeah,
So
well,
I know what you
it
mean.
certainly wants to tap into that disorientation that Shula is feeling. That feeling of perhaps, as you noted earlier, perhaps euphoria that she doesn't have to deal with that abuse any further. And so like the editing as far as blurring the lines of what's real and what isn't in certain moments with Shula, I think is really great. And so plants us into how disassociated she is. So that like that element of the filmmaking, you'll probably notice early on, but again, I think it is warranted here, and it's really well done.
It's really well done.
really
I
like
agree.
On Becoming a Guinea Fowl, this film is available to rent right now. Highly recommend it. Fantastic movie.
Brief watch too, 90-ish minutes, not too
90
long.
minutes. Really great. And as we noted earlier in the conversation, it is culturally specific, but also extremely universal simultaneously. There's a lot, like the universal themes that we see play out here, while our customs, our rituals, certainly different than how it is in Zambia, but spiritually, I'm sure a lot of us have sadly have experienced things like this before.
Yep.
But that's what makes the film powerful.
That's what makes it worldly.
Exactly. Go check it out. On Becoming a Guinea Fowl. It is available to rent, as I noted. All right. We have another review coming this week, and talk about a hard right turn, because the second film that we are talking about is absolutely nothing like this one. We're going to be talking about the Josh Hartnett film Fight or Flight. That should be.
What are you talking about? I thought this was a companion piece.
Yeah. I mean, that sometimes that is the fun of the week. Sometimes you get two films that are appropriate thematically, synonymous in many regards. Sometimes you get polar opposites, total ends of the spectrum.
I like the polar opposite side of things, because then that means going to see the movies is never the same.
Yeah,
like, if anything, maybe this this pairing here that we're doing here, this should have been 2025's Barbenheimer. That's what this should have been.
Yeah, exactly. If this was an extra film episode, and back in the day when we were doing extra film, this is a pairing that Brendan and I would have done. Yes, let's do Fight or Flight and also On Becoming a Guinea Fowl. That's one episode. We did that many times.
Absolutely. And honestly, it would probably be good to put them into the same episode, because I'm not sure we're going to have a lot to say about Fight or Flight.
Yeah, it could be a shorter episode. I do agree with that.
Yeah.
At any rate, we hope you enjoyed this one. Episode 635. Go and check that out as well. Speaking of Fight or Flight, a film that stars Josh Hartnett, we used Josh Hartnett in this new era that he's in as inspiration to talk about our top 5 actor comebacks in film.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
That was really fun. Love that conversation. Go and check that out. With that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Rungano Nyoni. Remember the name.
So good. Music in this movie.